what is stress? How does it impact your brain and your body? And how can you get out of that mode? I found my way out of the dark tunnel of stress.
Well, I feel like the first step to understanding something is actually knowing what it is. And I feel like everybody throws the word stress around constantly. I mean, what an overused word. You know, we're always talking like, oh, I'm stressed. I'm like, she's stressed. That's why she's doing that. And people get angry at me at times because I love defining things in the most simple terms, but it's so helpful. What is stress in its simple terms?
I love this question. And you're right. We're always like, oh, I'm so stressed. Oh, you're so stressed. This week is going to be so stressful.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? There are actually two kinds of stress, and not all stress is created equal. So there's healthy stress, good stress. In scientific terms, I won't get too scientific, but it's called adaptive stress. Adaptive stress is things like rooting for your favorite sports team, getting a promotion, getting a new job, your hosting gig at the Met Ball.
Yep.
Healthy, positive stress. It moves your life forward, maybe buying a house or graduating from school or getting a new dog or a pet or having a new baby.
Yep.
All of these things are versions of positive, healthy stress. It is biologically impossible to live a life with zero stress, and that is not the goal. The goal is to live a life with healthy, manageable stress. Now, when the other kind of stress is unhealthy stress, in scientific terms, it's maladaptive stress. Maladaptive stress is what you and I, when we hear the word stress or in pop culture, that is maladaptive stress. It's dysfunctional, unproductive, and harmful to your brain and your body. So all of the ways that we can feel stress, there's mental manifestations, there's physical manifestations. And the goal is to really transform that unhealthy stress, bring it back to balance to healthy, manageable stress so it can move your life forward and it can serve you rather than harm you. Mm-hmm. So those are really the key differences.
Mm-hmm. Why, on like an evolutionary level, why do humans get stressed?
We developed the ability to get stressed because it is a protective mechanism. It's a way for us to feel safe. Mm-hmm. When we were all cave people living together in tribes, we would go out foraging for food, let's say, and you see a tiger in the forest. Your fight or flight response is activated. That is your stress response. It's governed by a piece of your brain. It's called the amygdala. It's a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain. Mm-hmm. And the amygdala is what drives your stress response forward. When you see a tiger in a forest, you can either fight or you can flee. That's why we call it the fight or flight response. Your heart starts racing so that it pumps oxygen and blood throughout your muscles. Your lungs breathe quickly. You start having rapid, shallow breathing. That's what anxious breathing is. It's stressful breathing to get more oxygen. Your blood is shunted away from vital organs and to muscles so you can either fight or flee. Your pupils dilate. So it's a real biological response that's happening in the body when you have the fight or flight response. And it is a way to keep you safe. Now, after those times when people were cave dwellers, there would be a moment of respite. The tiger, you would either flee or fight, and then you would bring yourself back to equilibrium. Mm-hmm. The challenge with modern day stress is that amygdala is always in the background. Your fight or flight response is always in the background because all of these tigers, we're not fighting tigers in the forest. All of our tigers now are metaphorical tigers that never seem to go away.
Yeah.
Relationship problems, financial troubles, health issues, climate anxiety, so many things that just are on always in the background. And therefore, your amygdala is always on in the background. And so it's a part of our mechanism. So when you are feeling that chronic sense of stress, it's not you, it's your biology. In fact, your brain and your body are expertly designed to handle short bursts of acute stress. Yeah. It's when it becomes chronic that it becomes a problem, and that's when burnout can set in and all of the health problems. So it's a little bit of healthy stress is okay. Mm-hmm. Keeps you safe, protected. That amygdala, it is about survival and self-preservation. That is the only role of the amygdala.
Do you think cave people had that sort of maladaptive stress, like that, like non-helpful stress? Or do you think that's new?
I am not an evolutionary biologist, but what is interesting is if you think about the onslaughts, it's kind of the same rationale as when people say young people, they can't really handle stress like the old people used to, right? You hear that all the time. You guys aren't as hardy or as resilient as we used to be. And I always argue to say that the onslaughts that young people are facing with technology, with financial struggles, or all of these things. It's ongoing. It's different than the onslaughts that the older generation was facing. In the same way, evolutionarily speaking, of course, there was fear of famine or home issues with cave dwellers, but it likely wasn't something that was 24/7. Again, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but it just seems to me that now the modern day stressors are ongoing, continuous, and they never seem to go away. The other thing to kind of think about is, I use this analogy in my book, The 5 Resets, about this night watchman. When you think about yourself, so the amygdala is always in overdrive when you're feeling stressed. And evolutionarily speaking, when the tribe would sleep, there was a night watchman who would scan for danger so the tribe could rest. Now we are all our own night watchmen.
Yeah.
Because we are all feeling a sense of hypervigilance and a heightened sense of fear, and we're nervous about our own survival and self-preservation. And so we scroll. And so how do we do that? We scroll on social media, or we scroll reading headlines or news and all of these ways. So in many ways, we are creating our own stress because we are just feeling that sense of constant danger, and we're looking around and scanning the environment at all times. Back during cave dweller days, there might have been one person who was assigned and designated for that. Now, the way our modern world is working, it's just really different. And we're all doing that all the time. Hence, that amygdala always on in the background.
I hear a lot like, well, it's our responsibility as human beings to be aware of what's going on. And that's a huge ask of humanity. Can we handle that?
It's a beautiful question. I would say that it's really important to be an informed citizen.
Agreed.
I work in journalism. My 2 loves are medicine and journalism. And I deeply believe that it's our responsibility to know what is happening in the world and to be informed as citizens so that we can act in positive, productive ways, whether it means donating, whether it means calling out certain causes and amplifying things. So this is not about censorship. We want to make sure that people are engaged, and unfortunately, you can't do that at all times 24/7. You cannot do that at the expense of your mental health. And so it's about preserving and protecting your mental health so that you can be the amplifier and the engaged, informed citizen that you want to be about causes that you believe in. And so there's like a balance there. It's about striking a balance and knowing when is your stress something that is hard, that you can harness for good versus it becoming, like Spider-Man, it's a blessing or a curse. Same kind of thing. It's like, when is your stress something that can be used for good to improve humanity versus something that is going to be a curse on yourself, right? I mean, this is not about anyone bigger than you. It's like, when is your stress going to get so out of hand with you engaging in news? Because studies show that when you are engaged with graphic content, whether it be videos or if you're reading lots of things, there's lots of humanitarian crises in the world. And as you are engaging and consuming that information, you yourself, without actually having been in that conflict area, you are thousands of miles away, you can be impacted firsthand and develop signs of PTSD, which was a shocking finding in the research done by a researcher here in California, in fact. And her group found, Dr. Silver, Roxanne Silver, she found that people who consumed graphic images and content of things happening thousands of miles away increased their personal risk of PTSD and their risk of health conditions years later. So when you are consuming the news or headlines or social media or all of these things, first, it's important to recognize that it's not your fault. It's your primal urge to scroll. When you feel stressed, that amygdala is fired. You're scanning for danger. You are your own night watchman. And clickbait works on the biology of stress, right? You start feeling stressed, you feel hypervigilant, so then you scroll some more. And then that increases, it's a feedback loop. And then it increases your sense of hypervigilance, so you keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. So you find yourself coming down this rabbit hole. But what's fascinating is that this scrolling is not benign. It's not like, oh, I can just shut it off. It's hard to shut off. But this idea that you cannot, it has to be all or nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can still be an informed citizen, consume the news, do it in a way that feels responsible and good for you. Do it in a way that makes you take action
Yep.
on issues that matter without compromising your mental health. And
Yep.
that is the fine line. It's hard because it's a slippery slope. And as you consume, you want to consume more and more and more. And so you can do various things to reset your stress. The key is to create digital boundaries, because we have boundaries in every relationship in our life. We have boundaries with ourselves, with our partners, our children, our coworkers, our family members. Why don't we have a boundary when it comes to the relationship that we have with our devices?
Oof. It's almost like that boundary is like a boundary with yourself. And I think that's the hardest boundary. Like boundaries that you create with yourself, they're so hard to uphold because you are the checks and balances. I know I have moments where I feel like I have two sides of my brain fighting each other. I have this, it is like a devil and an angel, you know? I've always felt like I have that in a way. And that's a hard thing to manage, but it is worth it. It's so worth it. To sort of further demonstrate why it's so worth it, explain to me how stress impacts a human's well-being. I mean, how does stress's presence worth it? It's so worth it. I have two sides of my brain fighting each other. I have this, it is like a devil and an angel, you know? I've always felt like I have that in a way. Explain to me how stress impacts a human's well-being. I mean, how does stress's presence in someone's body impact their well-being on a day-to-day?
The thing with stress that is so difficult is, first, let me just paint the picture of the data. 70% of people across industry, regardless of industry, regardless of what job that you have, 70% of people, regardless of industry, have at least one feature of stress or burnout right now. That's like saying in a room of 30 people, 21 people are struggling with stress and or burnout. So if you are feeling any of these things, you are not the exception, you are the rule. How does stress manifest? It is such a personal thing. People have mental manifestations of stress and physical manifestations of stress. So certain mental manifestations of stress could be anxiety, depression, insomnia, hypervigilance, irritability, quick to anger. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the spectrum, lethargy, fatigue, not motivated, unproductive, or bored. There's so many flavors of stress.
Flavors.
Physical symptoms. Some people have no mental manifestations and get physical manifestations of symptoms. I'm sure you have friends or family members who say, oh, I don't know, my back just feels weird. Or you get neck pain,
yep,
or shoulder pain, or abdominal pain, dizziness, nausea, mm-hmm, tingling, numbness, headaches. There are so many kinds of physical manifestations of stress. The key is, first, of course, if you are feeling any of these things, to go see your doctor, because that's always important. As a doctor, I always have to say that, to get the full workup, like I did when I was having the palpitations. I went to a doctor and I said, the stampede of wild horses, is it something to be worried about? Is it my heart? Or is it something, what is it? So once your doctor does the whole workup of whatever symptom you have, then they tell you it's probably just stress. Everything checks out okay, it's stress. Mm-hmm. Stress in medical terms is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning we have ruled out everything else and then we say it's probably your stress. One statistic, which is really the genesis of why I decided to do the work that I do, is because one study back in the 1980s found that 60 to 80% of all primary care visits with doctors had a stress-related component. That means that someone has abdominal pain or headaches or something, and they go to see their doctor, they do the full workup, and they're like, it's nothing, it's just stress. So that happens, 60 to 80% of times. That's not to say stress causes these symptoms, but stress makes things worse.
Yeah.
And yet, only 3% of doctors counsel their patients for stress. A lot of that is because doctors work for them to really do their job well, a doctor has to work 27 hours a day. Who has 27 hours a day, right, to do that? And so there's it's not an individual failing of physicians. It's the system that's really broken. It's also not the individual failing of people to say, I don't know what's going on. Is this stress? Is it not? It's really hard to pin down. It's like this multi-hyphenate performer.
Yeah.
You can't pin stress down. And stress typically, with most people, it presents a certain way. So, I call it the canary in the coal mine. That's an analogy I like to use. It's this idea of historically, coal miners would go out down into the mines and they would take a canary, a bird, down with them. When the air got bad, the bird would stop singing and the canary would stop singing. And so they would look around and say, okay, time to go up. Why didn't they recognize that in themselves? They couldn't recognize that the air was bad because humans historically, we are just bad historians.
Yep.
We can't tell when something is happening. So the canary stopping to sing was the first tell. So often you will notice that there is certain things happen to you when you are feeling stressed before it becomes a major issue. For me, it's irritability, or people know sleep disturbances. You kind of nodded when I said anxiety. Some people feel anxious. So there's like this tell, your own canary of, wait, something's up, something's not right. But often, because we're bad historians, we're like, it's fine, just keep going, no problem, just keep going. And then you get into trouble.